Hey everybody, welcome to the November 17th edition of QRK Radio. We don't know what we're talking about today, so I'm going to make some stuff up as we go along. I have a couple of ideas, but Kevin and Quan are totally in the dark, so I'm going to put them on the spot a bunch today to come up with opinions and positions on stuff that they've probably never heard of. I think we got a couple of live listeners here today, so I'm watching the Twitter account, so hit me up with either DMs or tweet at us if you have any questions or anything you want to chat about. Okay, guys, are you guys trumped out?
I'm trumped off. I haven't looked at the news since Sunday, so I'm on a break.
So, like at all since Sunday?
Yeah, at all. I'm on a news. I'm trying to go the rest of the year without looking at any news, period.
So you're going to be dumb by the end of the year?
No, I don't think so.
What the hell do you do if you don't read the news?
Do work, exercise, read, nonfiction, learn, grow, develop myself.
All the other crucial things in life.
Yeah.
But so you're saying that just sitting and reading the news all day long is not a healthy obsession?
Yeah, that's basically that's what I determined in myself. Anyways, I'm not judging other people, but
I mean, look how Randy's turned out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Quan, how about you?
I haven't been following a whole lot. I mean, from my standpoint, I think everything's speculation at this point. We won't truly know until he's in office and things start to happen. I don't know why people have so much confidence that things are going to happen.
Things are happening though, Quan, right?
What's that?
Things are happening. We're dealing with cabinet appointments and special advisors who are the
and I guess you have they've got their general viewpoints, but in terms of legislation and how legislation is going to change, or treaties with other countries, relationships, who the hell knows, right?
Yeah. So we've heard a lot of stuff, a lot of rumors over the last week since, well, I guess, almost 9 days since the election. Let's bring it back to something we didn't get a chance to talk about last week, and the possible effects on Canada and our economy up here. There's been a lot made of NAFTA and President-elect Trump's desire to either renegotiate or tear up the trade deal. As Canadians, where do you sit on this fence? Are you concerned? Are you?
Well, I want to understand what the issues of NAFTA that he's kind of going after are, because it might not even be something that affects us. It might be something that affects the relationship with Mexico. Or it might be an industry that, maybe we don't even give a crap about. I don't know. But we do know that in general, he's got this viewpoint that America's got to isolate and protect itself. So maybe the things that'll come out of it won't be too good for Canada. It's hard to say which direction it's going to take.
Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree. I think my intuition is that Trump's hatred of NAFTA is more directed at Mexico and all the manufacturing jobs that went down there and whatnot. That being said, the U.S. is obviously the biggest economy in the world, and if you want a country that, could probably survive relatively well with reduced amounts of trade, they're probably it. I mean, I'm a big believer in trade, obviously, as a Canadian, with the U.S. representing something like 70% of our export market. It's pretty important to us. But I just look at it like economically, Canada and the U.S. in terms of wages, standard of living, and whatnot are pretty similar. So from a strictly cost perspective, Canadian goods can even be more expensive in some cases, right? I don't worry too much. And I also look at some of his policies specifically related to energy. And although on the climate side, I have some concerns, strictly economically speaking, I think they could benefit us.
Mm-hmm. Keystone XL you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I think let's come back to that point because I have a couple other questions on Keystone XL. as far as we're kind of forgetting too that NAFTA wasn't the only thing ever in place. There was a Canada-U.S. trade deal before NAFTA that was a precursor to it. So, are your thoughts that, if this thing actually gets torn up and thrown out the window, are we probably looking at a renegotiation of a Canada-U.S. trade deal? Because to me, what I hear is a lot of talk about, the U.S. and Mexico not being on the same economic footing. But I feel like Canada and the U.S. are, especially in the manufacturing and the industry sectors in the eastern parts of our countries, are very much on the same footing in terms of unionized labor forces, heavy industry, and candidly, a lot of those jobs have been replaced by automation.
Yeah, and also on that point, as someone with a supply chain background, I know that those manufacturing sectors out there, their supply chains are highly integrated across the border. So if you started, fundamentally changing the way some of these trade agreements are set up, a lot of businesses would not be very happy, and a lot of big businesses. And again, another thing is you look at, it's just Trump, right? The Republican Party in general is generally very pro-trade. So completely ripping up trade agreements, I don't know how likely that is.
And let's not forget, too, I don't know that it's, well, as you said, it's not a unilateral thing. I don't think. I've read some things that show that there are requirements in certain cases for Congress to sign off if the deal is to be scrapped altogether or to be withdrawn from. And let's not forget, it still leaves Canada and Mexico intact, although that is, from a Canadian perspective, I don't think it's as lucrative of a deal as you see with, as you see in the U.S.
I mean, how would that affect the flow of goods if you're dealing with Mexico and Mexico's dealing with you? I mean, most of your stuff has to, if it's going by ground, it's going to be passing through the U.S. I mean, how is that going to be affected?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, logistically, I'm sure there's ways to have pass through, the final destination of these goods is not the U.S., but if you're using their infrastructure, they're going to want a piece of the pie, so to speak, I'm sure.
And I want to point out something I think Trump mentioned. He brought out the fact that I think there is a huge trade deficit with Canada. I mean, we're exporting, like you said, Kevin, I think 70% of our natural resources or oil to the U.S. So I think there's an imbalance there. And I'm not sure whether or not he's going to address that, but he did point it out at some point during his campaign.
Fair enough. Any last thoughts before we move on to energy?
Let's move on to energy.
All right. So Keystone XL's, by all accounts, is going to get approved as long as the U.S. gets a quote. I believe the quote was a better deal. I could be wrong on that, so if I'm misquoting, apologies. But assuming Keystone XL gets approved, what does that do for Tidewater pipelines in Canada? Trans Mountain, Gateway, Energy East.
I don't know. I think that it maybe weakens the case more so for Energy East in some respects, because the Gulf Coast, and the Atlantic Coast, fairly similar transit times from those two spots. But I mean, Energy East going to the east coast of Canada would be closer to Europe, and there are refineries on the east coast that are underutilized that are importing oil from overseas right now. So I don't think it completely eliminates the case. I don't know the business case that well. I do, however, think that the case for a more pipeline capacity to the west coast remains pretty strong regardless.
What about the case to expand our customer base for fossil fuels? Right now, our customer base is Canada and the U.S., and predominantly the U.S. So if we get Keystone, that doesn't solve anything. All it does is give additional pipeline to the existing customer.
Yeah, make you more reliant on that customer almost.
In a sense, yeah. So do you guys, my take on this is, And a very smart person actually said to me, if you're opposed to Republican politics as a Canadian, you should want Trans Mountain to go through and Gateway to go through, because that's going to give you energy independence and you won't be reliant on that customer anymore. It pulls you further, it decreases your trade deficit. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's energy dependence here is important, and I think there's huge opportunities in the Asian market, and I think the window of opportunity is actually quite limited. I think the last it was a few years ago, but a presentation I went to, there were some of the oil and gas leaders, they were talking about this being I forget how many billions of dollars are kind of is the size of the opportunity here, but they said the window of opportunity is 10 or maybe even 20 years, but it takes time to build the infrastructure, and if Canada doesn't jump on it now, it's gonna miss out on it. And Australia and New Zealand, they're gonna dominate the market in that area, that region of the world, and I don't know where that's going to leave Canada, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, once those relationships are established, to come in as a new entrant could be difficult. And like you talked about the window only being so long, the shorter it gets, the tougher the payback calculations get from a financial perspective, right?
Mm-hmm. So suffice it to say, to summarize this at an infantile level, you guys are both still in favor of getting Tidewater pipelines.
Within Canada, 100%. I mean, it's going by rail right now anyways. Why not increase capacity and make it safer?
Yeah. Fair enough. So do you think the government's going to use, and I kind of have a thought on this based on statements that have come out, but do you think the government in Canada is going to use the potential approval of Keystone as an out to not have to spend political capital to approve Trans Mountain? Let's not forget that regardless of the economic case or the energy board's policies or approvals or any kind of parameters that are set down, it's quite apparent that in this country, the federal government's going to have to spend and Prime Minister Trudeau is going to have to spend a lot of political capital to put through a pipeline.
Yeah, he will. But I guess the main opposition in this country is also very pro-pipeline. It's not like, yes, the NDP, the third party could make a lot of noise against if the Liberals approve it, but the Conservatives are not going to. If the Liberals don't approve it, in certain parts of the country, that's going to really feed into the conservative base and building back up their support, right?
But this part of the country can't put a conservative government in power without Ontario and Quebec.
True.
For our non-Canadian listeners, we don't have an electoral college, but suffice to say the power centers in Canada in terms of the number of electable members of parliament, and you have to have the majority or a minority winning amount of MPs are in Quebec and Ontario. If you win Quebec and Ontario both, you're pretty much in power. Is that fair to say? So does that carry a lot of weight? Like, is our populist movement, because we have one in this country, I kind of have a hunch our populist movement tends to lean left, not right.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So given that, is a pipeline a fatal blow to a government?
I don't know. It's nationally, it's a tough. A tough question.
Energy East is a no-brainer. It's let's stop buying oil from.
I honestly have a hard time with this one because you hear the loud, environmentalist groups that show up and protest, and that's their right. Good for them. I know in cases they're paying people to do that, and it's the noise that gets the coverage. I think that at least Ontario West and probably on the East Coast for sure with the refineries and stuff out there, the average Canadian is probably generally pro-pipeline. They see the benefits that it can bring, I think. That's just my feeling on it.
There have been a couple polls that indicate that it's not as split as you would think it would be.
Yeah, but by the news coverage, right?
People that are leaving in the ground altogether.
Yeah.
But there are some, certainly. Do you think it's going to happen then? Cut to the chase.
I do think they're going to approve Trans Mountain.
Quan?
Yeah, I think they'll approve it.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the announcement last week or the week before for the, $1.5 billion they're spending on protecting the coastlines environmentally. I think that was a huge setup.
Yeah, that's kind of a quid pro quo is what I understand it to be. I would agree. There have been statements made that by both the provincial government in Alberta and the federal government that it doesn't appear that they're going to use Keystone as, hey, we got a pipeline, let's call it a day. That doesn't seem to, there seems to be an understanding that it needs to happen from an economic standpoint, and which benefits the whole country. And carbon pricing and funding to protect waters, I think, is the price you pay to get those through. And if it's going to happen, it's got to happen early in the government, because it's not going to happen in the last year and a half.
No, you're right. You're right. And I think when it does happen, the industry is going to have to, there obviously is going to be opposition and protest and all sorts of things, but the industry, the pro side's really going to have to step up their game in educating the reasons why, the benefits it brings, nationally, to help bring more on side.
Yeah. And hopefully not have mistakes like we saw around Prince Albert this summer, where maintenance was left lacking and a pipeline blew into a river.
Yeah, because any little slip up is going to get, completely.
That wasn't a little one, though, to be fair.
True.
That was a fairly large one as far as it goes, because anytime you hit a body of water is a big deal.
True. And
especially a moving body of water like that. And that was problematic, I would say. Let's drive on. I just want to do a little quick housekeeping thing for anybody listening. I've been DMing back and forth with one of our listeners here. So when we're doing these live podcasts, we can't see the chat that's going on in YouTube unless you can you see it, Kevin?
Yeah, I don't know if you have it, but on the left-hand side of the screen, there's a little blue box.
But that is just us, correct? Who are in the Hangout. Hey, Bill.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Give us a note on that chat, if you haven't already. I think it's just us as hosts that are seeing this, unless everybody can see my hi comment that's in there. But if you want to hit us up with a question, best thing to do is DM at QRK Radio or hit at QRK Radio on Twitter. And I'm watching that account closely here, so I can pick you guys up on Twitter as we go.
Yeah, you're right.
I have our channel up on YouTube, and you can kind of see the comments there.
Okay,
Yeah.
Perfect. So Quan's going to watch YouTube, and I'm going to watch Twitter. Hit us up on either one then.
I also have the YouTube open on my other screen.
You have the YouTube open along with the Twitter and the Facebook?
Yeah, although interestingly, the YouTube on the broadcast is probably about 5 seconds behind where we actually are.
I paused it just to.
Doesn't
Doesn't need a bandwidth, yeah.
That's a good idea, actually.
But I think the comments still come through.
Perfect. So is there anything we need to address in there, Quan, before we drive on to whole fun sets of topics here?
Paulina mentioned here, it'd be nice if the US and Canadian dollar evened out again.
That would be nice for consumers. I don't disagree. I'm not sure it's great for Canada. Economically speaking, on a whole, it definitely hurts our manufacturing sector because we're operating on more of a level playing field. We don't get that discount on all of our goods that encourages tourism and U.S. purchases. But it would be nice to, pay a little less in terms of cost of living. I'm not going to lie. Like, it's been a banana sandwich at grocery stores, hey, this year for Canadians. I mean, literally a banana sandwich, because that's all anybody can afford to buy, to eat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, on that note of a joke falling incredibly flat with my two co-hosts who are not paying any fucking attention.
Hey,
I don't like banana jokes.
I have to say something since you just dropped an F-bomb there. My girlfriend was watching something on CBC last night, some show. It was like just after 9 o'clock, and they were dropping F-bombs uncensored.
On CBC?
On CBC. I thought that shit wasn't allowed.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's allowed.
But there was like 3 fucks in the span of like 1 minute.
After like 10 or 11, you're allowed on Canadian TV.
That's what I thought. It was later than 9, though.
Maybe you should file one of those complaints that they always put up about that if they're not.
Oh, no, I'm not going to complain.
So you'll pit the CBC against the CRTC, and we'll have a battle of the governments, which is an awesome segue. Speaking of battle of the governments, things are heating up in Alberta on this power purchase agreement shenanigans that we were talking about a few months ago. I haven't read the article. I wanted to this morning, and I really regret not having time yet. But the president of the Calgary Chamber of Commerce came out today, and the quote in the headline anyway was that Alberta will effectively be a banana republic if the NDP government does what their plan is. So let me lay out their plan, and then I want to hear your guys' reaction. There is talk coming out of the government that they're not ruling out the possibility of legislating those contracts to be invalid. So for background, the Alberta provincial government is suing power companies in Alberta who have purchased 20-year contracts that are ending in a couple of years. They purchased them nearly 20 years ago to basically manage the power pool in Alberta. I don't want to get into all the technical because we did that on a prior podcast back on Blab. But these contracts are now have been made, quote, more unprofitable by a carbon tax being put in by the provincial government. So these companies are opting out, which is a clause in the contract. The government is suing these companies saying that clause was put in illegally at the 11th hour during negotiations 18 years ago and want them to be forced to hold the contract and bear the losses. One of the power companies that they're suing is the City of Calgary-owned NMAX. So in effect, you have the provincial government suing the City of Calgary for power contracts that affect citizens of all of Alberta. What the government's now saying is we might just legislate that those contracts have to be held in. Like basically just put a law in, take it out of the hands of the court system and just put a law in forcing them to get their way. Quan, thoughts? Why are they doing that? Why go down this road of legislating without going through the courts? Or going through the courts and then legislating if you don't like what happens?
I don't know why you would do that. I mean, it sends a really bad signal to the market and to potential investors and companies that want to do business in the province. So that's my perspective, and I really don't see why, why the government would go ahead and do that unless it's, a power trip or an ego thing.
Kevin?
Well, I mean, this is like a fundamental structure of the way our economic system works. You sign contracts in good faith at that time. You can renegotiate contracts, but you cannot unilaterally change them because you don't like them when you're a new government in power.
According to a lawyer who I read a quote from in a news article, you can legally do that if you wanted to.
But
clarify.
Really, like
allowed to do it.
The route I could see this going is, say the provincial government legislates that these contracts remain in force. Wouldn't the companies then sue potentially all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court would potentially say, like, no, Alberta government, you guys had contracts in place, you can't just overrule them? I'm
an accountant, not a lawyer.
I mean, that's how I see it going. Like, this isn't a centrally managed economy. It's it relies on contracts between willing parties, and you have to honor them.
So let me throw another wrinkle into this that I think is hilarious. Personally, I think it's hilarious in its kind of inconsistency. Quan, you made a really good point about the market responding, and going back to the Chamber of Commerce quote about it being a banana republic. It very much feels that way when you're like, oh, screw it, we'll just legislate our win without going through the court system. The government is about to put forth a whole slew of apparently 20-year-long contracts to manage renewable power in the province to private industry, while meanwhile threatening to legislate their way on the tail end of old 20-year-old contracts. What do you think happens to those new contracts?
The province is going to get some terrible rates because the uncertainty and risk from the company's perspective is like through the roof with the thing we just talked about going on.
Contracts might even get stranded.
Yeah.
No one's even going to want to put their money here because, that's just ridiculous. There's already enough risks and uncertainty with renewables at the moment. I don't see how that really helps the cause.
It seems like, we're dealing with a situation now where polls are showing the provincial government is getting approval ratings that is back to the kind of their historic lows of around, I heard 14%, right? Is that correct? You guys know?
Yeah, I heard it was under 30 for sure, but 14 would be pretty shocking.
Okay, I'm going to look that up. Is this just are we at a point here where this government is giving up on re-election, or are they using the early part of their 4-year term here to play rough?
I don't know. It kind of seems to me like they realize their re-election chances are getting pretty low. So they're like, F this noise, let's do as much as we can along our ideological path before 2019 comes.
Is that not wasted effort?
Yeah, it is.
Because
it's tremendously detrimental too.
Okay, I got a poll up here so we can deal with real numbers instead of made up things. How's this for not being prepared? I think it's a pretty good episode so far. We should never prepare. So a year and a half after the NDP government was elected into power, a new poll finds the PCs are number one again amongst decided voters. This is on News Talk 770's website in Calgary. Overall, the PCs have 38.4%, followed by the Wild Rose at 25.7% and the NDP at 19.7%. The Liberals at 9.4% and the Alberta Party at 3.5%. Which I think those last two is just an indication of the size and funding available to those two parties at this stage of the game.
Yeah, the Alberta Party hasn't been around for too long.
No, and side note, personal opinion, I think they'd be wise to try to consolidate the Liberal Party into their brand.
Yeah.
And fold and merge in the Liberal Party and get rid of that brand, because I don't think that's a successful brand in this province, period. Mm-hmm. And they both have good platforms, in my personal opinion. Okay, so what we're looking at right now with these polls is if there was an election today, I suspect we'd end up with a PC minority government, and the current majority government would be relegated quite badly to third-party status by the looks of it. Like it pretty much looks to me like they're holding their Edmonton core, which isn't too surprising because they've added, 7,000 government jobs, predominantly in Edmonton. Since,
I heard it was a lot more than that.
14,000?
I don't.
It's a good chunk. I mean, we're looking at an unemployment rate differential between the two cities, that are 3 hours apart by car of 3.5%. Like Calgary's hovering around 10%, and Edmonton's about 6.5, I believe. Mm-hmm. So this is from a couple of weeks back, and a lot of that is because of government jobs, which exist there and don't tend to as much here. So could they just be playing rough and just trying to get their way then? I know you guys chatted about this briefly, but given these polls, are they looking at this? Are they recoverable?
I think the only way that they're recoverable at this point is if the right splits the vote so perfectly that they somehow, by winning Edmonton and maybe a few, I don't know if they could win any seats in Calgary anymore, but maybe.
Could they win a majority?
No, they couldn't win a majority. And regardless of the outcome and regardless of the egos, I think if the Wild Rose and the PCs were sitting there with enough to collate and, govern, they would find a way to do it.
Yeah. So we could theoretically have a coalition government.
Oh yeah, that I could see quite possibly.
Interesting. which is something we've never seen in this province.
Especially when you think, it's 2016, end of 2016 now. We're still, 2.5 years away from this next election?
Roughly, yeah.
The economic situation could be better by then, which may lead to a few people, maybe there won't be, their numbers might not be quite so bad. So,
things are better now, though, than they were,
when they got elected even.
And he became into power. So were they just riding the honeymoon then, and now they're eating it because of the economy? Or has it been the series of missteps? Like we've had the very controversial bill, was it Bill 8 or Bill 6, that went after farmers and kind of eroded a bunch of rural support. And then we had the revenue neutral carbon tax, which is the furthest thing from revenue neutral possible. I think there's a lot of people who support the carbon tax conceptually.
I do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, conceptually, but I would prefer something like Michael Chong, the PC leadership candidate's proposal, which is tax the hell out of carbon and then offset it by reducing personal and corporate tax rates, so that you're rewarding people who are efficient with low taxes, and people and businesses, and like our company Quan that telecommutes virtually everywhere,
mm-hmm.
right, and doesn't have an office, versus just fundamentally saying, okay, we're just going to distribute wealth by taxing people more and crediting it back to people with lower incomes. So there's that. There was, there's more. There was the royalty review is probably the only thing that actually came in and was positive as far as major policy. And then, of course, there's this PPA thing that we talked about.
And the minimum wage increase.
Yeah, the minimum wage increase, which is really going to be impactful on small businesses because of the size of the minimum wage.
There's also something that I've seen brewing lately about WCB changes.
Okay.
People are a bit up in arms about, and there's actually a petition now. I signed it this morning. I'm trying to find it now.
Well, while Quan finds that, I would say from my perspective, not all the policies. I definitely don't agree with all the policies, but I do agree with some of them. I think the thing that's happening is they're making so many changes all at once to try and push through this agenda they have in the 4 years that, they might just have, that there's this complete change exhaustion because to start off, the economic situation wasn't good. And then you're just piling on all these changes that are all having these impacts, and it's just kind of this perfect storm.
If the budget was balanced, Kevin, do people accept these changes better?
Yes. If Calgary didn't have 10% unemployment, people would accept these changes better. If there was one change per year versus, half a dozen of these big changes, people would accept them better, I think.
So people are generally going to push back against change. I don't think that has to be something I think, in fact, you can't shy away from wanting to change as a government.
You have to.
Are these changes, in your opinion, in the best interest of the population, or are they ideologically driven, or both?
I think it's both. For example, the carbon tax, like I said, fundamentally, I agree that in order to change behavior, people have to feel it at their wallets. So doing it in an effective manner, I think, is in the world we live in, I think it's important.
But if you just refund the carbon tax as a rebate to half the population, how much are you really accomplishing?
Well, then it's a question of where does that carbon come from? I know that I'm pretty sure industry generates the majority of it.
But industry's feeding our consumer behaviors, right?
Yeah.
Let's be realistic here. All those protesters flying in to sit in front of an access pipeline are burning fuel to get there.
Yep.
There's a huge element of hypocrisy here. So if we're, you have to charge industry, right? I get that. But industry is going to throughput it to the end users in every single case. It's going to be an increase in your food bill. Which is fine. I get that. But if we're just using it as a mechanism for revenue generation, and we're using it as a form of progressive taxation, and let me be clear, I'm not against progressive taxation as a concept, are we actually accomplishing help for the environment with it? Like conceptually it's good, but execution matters as well.
No, you're absolutely right. It has to modify behavior to be successful. And I think making it truly revenue neutral, or to the point where people can actually benefit by practicing good behaviors.
Yes,
that's how you actually achieve that, right? But
like how you get a rebate for buying a hybrid.
Yeah. You know,
I got a hybrid, but it was unaffordable to me relative to the non-hybrid version of the car we ended up getting as a family vehicle, because it was in BC, it would have been even money, and in Alberta, I foot the bill for the hybrid myself, and yet I still have to pay full carbon tax. I don't get a rebate for having a hybrid of any kind.
I guess the only rebate you might get, it's an indirect one, is that
I burn less fuel.
Yeah, you burn less fuel. Exactly.
I get it, but it's not economic, right?
No.
And people are going to act in the best interest of their wallet.
Yeah.
As much as they talk about ideals, it's few and far between that someone's going to really live by those ideals.
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, like I was trying to say in there, and you said too, governments have to lead change. Otherwise, you know, status quo is just going to stay the status quo. And if you look over history, obviously, as a species, as countries, as whatever, progress happens from changes, right? And they're painful at first, but people adjust, businesses adjust, and life goes on.
I think if you look, though, it's how the change is executed.
Exactly. It's how it's executed.
It's when there is what we're seeing here, which is a kind of ramming down the throat feeling, versus collaborative compromise,
and pace.
Less effective. Like if the government had said, yeah, we're a majority, but we need a carbon tax, it's happening. But PCs, Wild Rose, Liberals, Alberta Party, let's get together and think about the economics of this. How are we going to put it through? What makes sense? And let's compromise on something that's going to satisfy the bases of each of those parties. I think you reach this position of compromise in the province where everybody feels through their members of the Legislative Assembly that they've been consulted. At least people have a feeling of having had input on it. And when you just say, nope, we're broke because we spend like maniacs. So we had a $10 billion deficit, which is just about as big as the entire country, just in one province. So we're going to raise money by taxing. People aren't stupid. They see it. They're like, okay, we're going to carbon tax you to raise money because we're not willing to cut our budget. In fact, we're expanding our budget. Times are tough and we're spending beyond our means to begin with, so let's double down.
Yeah, I mean, I think the collaboration point is a great one. People do need to feel included in the process, and also the pace of it is important. I'll be interested to see how this election format review that's going on at the federal level turns out, because they did do exactly that. They created a committee with members of parliament based on the share of the popular vote, I believe. So the Liberals don't even have a majority in that committee.
This was the
electoral reform, yeah. That's the kind of structure that I think you're generally talking about, and I think it will be interesting to see A, what the recommendation that comes out of that is, and B, how it's actually implemented. But I think that process is one that is a good kind of model to potentially follow.
So I'll tee this up as a topic for next week. Are we actually going to have electoral reform at the federal level?
That I'm not sure.
Let's think about that for next week, because there's some meat on that bone. I agree with you, Kevin. There's fundamental flaws with what's happening right now, and I think more than anything, people are mad that we're like not even a little bit dipping into the piggy bank, into the debt for operating costs in our province, but massively so. And I don't think that you can justifiably say that we have it that much better than most other provinces in terms of our quality of services. No. So, I think that there's some questions that have to be answered there. And it's we're going to see it. I mean, you're seeing it in the polls right now. the strong sentiment that even with two parties on the right splitting the vote, it's highly unlikely that the governing party would even get a minority government by the looks of it. Strictly on poll numbers, which we know how great those are.
Yeah, and Kwan, you're looking up a petition. I'm curious what that petition is.
I can't find it. I don't even know what I signed now. No,
Great.
question.
Great.
You know what? There were three things, but the main thing I think was the minimum wage legislation. And I think it was targeted towards business owners.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that, that one's a whole other discussion as well, because fundamentally I agree with the concept of a living wage, but again, how this is being rolled out, I don't necessarily think is being done properly.
Yeah. Well, and there's an element of, cost of living goes up when the minimum wage goes up.
Mm-hmm.
So, it doesn't exist in a bubble, right? Where it's like, well, we just need to up the minimum wage and people will be able to live. Well, no, cost of living is going to go up and then the minimum wage has less buying power. Exactly.
It's a very complex thing, and it is a bit of a cycle that way. So.
It'll help the situation for, maybe a year or two, but the whole system catches up and you're kind of, I feel like you'd end up back at square one really quick.
So I'm going to throw a wild idea out there as far as quote unquote living wage. What if we reduced our lowest tax bracket in Alberta? People complained for years and years and years, and not wrongly, that we had a flat tax in Alberta of 10% on personal income taxes. So somebody making $1 million a year is going to pay the same tax as somebody making 20 grand a year at a marginal rate. BC's is like 6 and change at the lowest level. So when the NDP government came into power, they decided to put progressive taxation back in the form of just increasing all the other tax rates, but not lowering the base tax rate, which is really what the problem here was.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with the living wage, if you pay 10% of your money to provincial taxes on your own, that's a lot of earning power gone, right? So does this come back to, again, the government's just spendthrifting and pushing the problems out on industry instead of fixing things themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely some truth to that.
If you earn, Kevin, like 50 grand a year, you're several $1,000s better off moving to BC.
Yeah.
Than living in Alberta. So you can talk about cost of rent and you can talk about cost of food and fuel and all those things, which is a fair point. But if you moved out to BC, the carbon tax out there is roughly revenue neutral and your personal taxes are lower. So as a business owner, am I just paying for the NDP's carbon tax for my staff?
Yeah, I mean, that's a way to look at it. I mean, I think this goes down a path that becomes very interesting when you start talking about the broader subject of what the future of work looks like in an age of increasing automation, which leads to lower skilled jobs being replaced by computers and machines. And then what are these people going to do, right? Like, then you start getting into the area of, guaranteed living allowance, basically, right? But I mean, it's a very fascinating subject, and I think it's one that we should be, as a society, talking about more because it's happening. Yes, we definitely should. I had a really interesting conversation a few days ago with a guy about it.
Yeah, I've read a little bit about minimum incomes as well, and it's as a tool to accomplish the same thing as a minimum wage. It's really an interesting concept.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard people propose scrapping things like EI. And scrapping programs like scrapping minimum wages, leaving minimum wages or lowering them, scrapping EI, and then having like a working allowance for people who work a certain number. Like, you have to be working, but you get a minimum allowance, or at least attempting to work, or reducing EI and things like that. So it's really interesting. It's conceptually very interesting. We're running up against noon here, so let me throw out. See if we can squeeze 8 minutes in on this. I think we can, because I think it's a pretty one-sided discussion. And then we'll wrap. Actually, you know what? Screw it. This has been a pretty serious discussion day. I was going to talk about greenhouse gases and Paris Accord and the new U.S. government and Canada and our position on carbon taxes. Let's leave that for another day. Quan, you still riding your motorbike? Or is it a wait?
You know what? November was surprisingly an excellent month for riding. I think I was out more days in November than I was in September.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I was riding my bike in shorts on the weekend, like Sunday, 4 days ago.
Nice. Were you using bike lanes, Kevin?
Let's see. No, I was riding on the paths on
the path lanes. Okay. I was hoping you'd say I was riding on the roads.
Yeah.
When's it going away, Quan? When are the bikes going away for the year, guys?
Well, I asked this question. I'm part of a motorcycle crew, and I asked the question. I'm fairly new to the crew, and I asked the question a few months ago, how do you guys winterize your bikes? And everyone's like, yeah, I just throw a cover on it. And then I was a little perplexed, and he's like, we ride it whenever there's a nice sunny day, we take our bikes out, even if it's in the middle of like January. So I think I might, because my bike's stored underground and it's somewhat heated, I think I'll just do that and take it out on a nice December day or February day.
It's kind of like you and your little Miata there, trying to drive it, with the top down one day a month, right?
First year I had it, I drove with the roof down 1 day a month, every single minimum of 1 day per month for the entire calendar year. And truth be told, the days because I would carefully pick my days in like February and January, that time of year, like the dead of Calgary winter. It was really carefully done. I think I had better top down drives those months than I did sometimes in like spring and fall.
Yeah, because when it's warm and we get those Chinook winds, it's like people are out in their shorts.
Well, and it just feels so good, right? Because you're used to the cold, and then all of a sudden it's warm.
Yeah. Throw on a toque and you're good to go, right? In the convertible. And Quan, you got a helmet on, so that keeps your head warm. Throw on some warm clothes and you're good to go. And it's for you have gravel, which is an issue. For me, gravel's just fun, as long as they don't spin out. It can be nastier. Like I've had a couple times in spring, even summer. I think once I straight up had to pull over because it was raining so hard I couldn't outdrive the rain. Like normally if you get going fast enough, your car has a little slipstream and you can drive through a rainstorm without getting any water inside. But it got bad enough that I had to pull over and like emergency put my roof up, and I was half drenched inside my car. And that was like middle of July. Whereas in the winter, it doesn't snow like that, right? Mm-hmm. It's not bad. I still drive mine all year when I can. It's less. I drive it a lot less now with the baby because I have yet to convince my wife that it's safe to put the car seat in the front of the convertible. It totally is legally and practically. Like it's got belt latch anchors, and I can turn the airbags off, and it can hold a rear-facing bucket and all that stuff. And I'm trying to convince her that it'd be harder to flip over my Miata than it would a SUV. So even though there's no roof, it's low risk, but at some point I will convince her, I'm sure. But with a kid, it's a 2-seater, right? So I can't go anywhere other than by myself now with the convertible, unless someone's babysitting. So I drive it less and less, but it still remains a good toy. Quan, does Angel ever go riding with you?
She doesn't. No.
No?
No, her family, her father disapproves of motorcycles. He doesn't even know that I ride.
Oh, really?
Yeah. She's not supposed to marry anyone who rides motorcycles.
That ship sailed.
But it happened. He just had a friend get in a really bad accident back in the day, and he didn't survive. So they were really close. So he made a conscious decision not to ride a motorbike ever again, and kind of passed that down the family.
Well, it's like your buddy this week, right?
Yeah, so we meet every Sunday at a local coffee shop just to get together and talk bikes and whatnot, shoot the shit. And one of the members on the way to coffee on Sunday got in an accident. So what happened was a car was changing lanes, and I guess he was riding in their blind spot. Didn't see him, and ended up clipping the rear of this guy's bumper, and he lost control and swerved, and his bike went down, and somehow it just like flipped right over him. And so the bike was totaled, and he walked away with a torn ligament in his hand, and he also came out of a pretty serious accident, I think a couple of years ago. So his shoulder mobility wasn't so great, and so he re-injured his shoulder. Ended up in the hospital, but he's alive, and he's seems like he's doing well. We're gonna couple of guys are gonna go help him move his bike on Saturday. Like I think it's still at the crash site. So yeah, thank God.
That wasn't worse.
Yeah,
it could have turned out a lot worse because Crowchild speed limit there is like 80 kilometers an hour, and there's like barricades and stuff in the way, and if you hit one of those at 80 kilometers an hour, your chances of survival are pretty low.
Yeah, I know he's lucky. I mean, that for me, I love bikes, but that's kind of the thing that always stops me is other people. And especially in this city, like there's a guy last night on the freeway passed me going like 100 miles an hour. Like no word of a lie. I was going like 105 like kilometers. So I guess that'd be like 60 miles an hour, which is the speed limit. And dude like flew around me to the point where his car was body rolling like to max shock absorb like depth on one side to the other, because it's like a 4-door Honda sedan, and dude's flying. So like stuff like that, like if you're on a bike at night, you're a lot smaller of a sight line, and a guy going that fast on the highway, weaving in and out of fairly heavy traffic, that's insane, right? Mm-hmm. But on that note, I know it looks fun, and all the stories, Quan, you tell, like, it seems like a riot, and I'm not gonna lie, as fun as my little roadster is, I'm not sure it quite is the same feeling. In fact, I know it's not quite the same feeling as being out on a bike, but that's a story for another day. Hey, everybody, I think we had some live listeners today, which kicks ass. Thanks for joining us on YouTube. We're slowly getting better again at this format. It's always me and my crappy technology and figuring this stuff out that keeps us late, but we're trying. Guys, you want to make 11 a.m. on Thursdays our time? Should we do that?
Yeah, I think until it doesn't work anymore, we could.
Okay, all right. Yeah. Okay, everybody, next week, 11 Mountain time, so 9 a.m. p.m. Eastern. We'll be back here on YouTube live. We're going to talk climate change policies in the U.S. and Canada and how that's going to work. And then other topics to be determined. We won't prepare very much because, candidly, I thought this episode was awesome for having literally no preparation. For those of you who don't know, when we got on the horn and chatted about the show before we went live and fired up the stream, the boys were like, okay, Randy, you got to lead this one, because we literally don't have anything planned. We didn't even plan to have this podcast until last night. Quan and I were
hockey game.
Hey, you want to go live tomorrow at 11? So this week we're going to plan next Thursday, 11 Mountain, 1 Eastern, new quirk, new topics, no level of intelligence. Have a good one, everybody. Thanks for listening.
See ya.